Okay,
All right, thank you. One sec, I'll start. All right, guys, we have a really good show for you. We have Tony Mandarich. E60 did a documentary on him. He played for the Indianapolis Colts and the Green Bay Packers. He has a great recovery story. This is personally my dream interview. Thank you for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to first talk about your experience with E60. What was that like when you did it?
It was pretty cool. I mean, I think E60 is kind of like ESPN's probably top level of documentary where they dig the deepest on the story.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of multiple things with ESPN over the years, like Where Are They Now kind of stories. When they do Where Are They Now stories, you're getting old. But then there'd be like little montages where they would do like, whatever was, as time passed, whatever was going on. They would sometimes do stuff around the draft, but the E60 was awesome. I mean, the guy that was the producer that produced my E60, his name is Simon, just a great guy, great human being. It was kind of like, his project, and it took about a year to film the whole thing and to do the whole thing. So it was a great experience. And the biggest thing for me was that I shared with them was I'll participate under two conditions: that number one, we don't throw anybody under the bus, and number two was that at the end of the day that this has to help somebody.
It personally touched my life. It changed me for who I was. So that's why I reached out to you, and it was such a cool story. I want to transition. So your brother played at Kent State. You talk about in that how you went to live with him because it was very hard to get noticed in Canada. Talk about what that was like coming over from Canada over here.
It was, it was a big step. I mean, I was, 15 years old, and it was a big step. And I'll say, like, moving from one country to another, but you're moving from Canada to the US. It's not like, I'm moving from, mid Europe, from somewhere in mid Europe to the US. So America or Canada is very much like the US, but it's got a lot of differences. If you want to play football, the US is the place to be. It's kind of like if you want to play hockey, it's like, the US has got great hockey, but it's really Canada's the place to be. So, I wanted to, at an early age, I decided that I wanted to pursue football as a career and on a serious way. So my brother was going to Kent State University. And I think he went there from 79 to 83 or 84. And then, so my first 3 years in Canada of high school were up until 83. And then my senior year of high school, I moved down and lived with him in Kent, Ohio. And I went to Kent Roosevelt High School, which are the Rough Riders. Coach John Nemec was the head coach, and he's, I think, coached there for a long time. I want to say over 30 years, maybe. Just great people. I mean, I love Ohio. Ohio, I wanted to play at Ohio State. They were my team that I wanted to play for. And in a nice way, they said that they didn't have a room for me or a room for a scholarship, which I think was more or less saying you weren't good enough to play for us. And I always remember deep down inside going, you're going to pay for that someday.
I mean, you made those D tackles and some of those guys pay for it for sure.
and that's no disrespect to Ohio State, because listen, they're Big Ten and they're a great football. That's great football country where you're in.
Yeah. I had to talk about Nick Saban. What kind of a recruiter was he? And then talk about your experience a little bit about Michigan State and the pressure, people don't really realize about being the quote unquote big man on campus.
Nick's area, one of his areas for recruiting was Ohio. So, and he was, I think, friends with Coach Nemec, who's the head coach of the high school. So there was a lot of, luckily for me, there was a lot of guys on our team. I'd say 3 or 4 guys that were like tier one or whatever they call them, 5-star athletes. Mm-hmm. So other colleges were coming in to watch them play, to scout them out and recruit them and offer them scholarships. So that was good for me because I was keeping my fingers crossed that I would get noticed. And I kind of did. And when Nick came down, he was looking at some of the other guys and then noticed me and said, what's the story with this guy? And Coach Nemec explained everything. So then I met with Nick, and then they offered me a trip to Michigan State to visit, just like they do with everybody, and not everybody, but people that they're interested in. And they offered me a scholarship. But Nick was, people see little bits of Nick Saban, right, as far as on the field and sidelines and some interviews. He's really been consistent. Is like, even back then, he was a defensive back coach in 1984 at Michigan State. So he went from there and went to becoming a head coach at Toledo, and then was a defensive coordinator under Belichick for Cleveland, the Browns. So, I mean, a lot of people don't know that. So, and now maybe one of the greatest coaches in college football history.
Yeah.
So, so what, seven national championships.
Yeah.
So it's pretty amazing. Nick's consistent. It's really, he's a great human being. His wife, Terry, they're great people, great family. But he'll always take things back down to fundamentals. If you're not doing the fundamentals correctly, you can't do the fancy stuff correctly.
Yeah.
So, and we've all heard that stuff, and yeah, he loses his temper, but you know what? He's passionate about what he does. He loves what he does. So there's no way I saw that coming, that he was going to be, winning 7 national championships when he recruited me. But after he left Michigan State, when I was still at Michigan State and went on to Cleveland, I was like, wow, this guy's like, in demand. So it kind of put things in perspective, and you could see that greatness was ahead of him.
Yeah, for sure. Can you talk about a little bit of your time at Michigan State? What was it like? And then I was wanting to have a side question with that. That was when your steroid use started.
Mm-hmm.
When did you kind of start that?
So, and I'll answer the second part of the question first. So really, the steroid use started, it was, I think, graduation at Kent Roosevelt was in like May, towards the end of May. So I started steroids in April. I knew there was like two months left of high school. And it was just, I had a barrier that I couldn't break through in the gym, a weight plateau as far as strength. So I took a little bit of steroids, very safe steroid, very low dose. And within a couple of weeks, I broke through that barrier.
Yeah.
So it was obviously like, this works.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, the way my mind thinks is, if a little bit works good, more must work better, right? And that's not always the truth.
Yeah.
But then, the years at Michigan State, I used them. We were only tested, I would say twice, maybe 3 times, and it was only at bowl games.
Yeah.
Because you got to remember, that was 1980, in the mid 80s. So the testing wasn't as big. Steroids were big. Everybody knew, everybody knew, and I don't want to say that everybody was taking them, but a lot of people were taking them. And it was, my time at Michigan State was fantastic. The steroid use was all me, like all my decision. It had nothing to do with Michigan State or the football team or anything. That was just, my own stuff. But Michigan State is a phenomenal school, great campus, just great coaching. I learned more from those coaches about life, from them coaching us on the field and in the meeting rooms than most people I've met.
Yeah, I play few tournaments every year at Michigan State. I've met all the coaches over various sports. They were all amazing to me, treated me, their own, just on their own. So it was great. I wanted to talk about, there's a lot of kids, like especially in our school, kids get asked to do steroids. And what do you tell kids who are thinking about it or who are doing them right now?
Well, the first thing I would say is, I would lean on the side heavily of not doing
Mhm.
them. The the short-term gains are great. Um, they're probably against the rules in high school.
Yeah, they
I
are.
can guarantee you they're against the rules in college, and they're definitely against the rules in pros.
Mhm.
So even if a high school player is taking them and they're thinking to themselves, they're not going to go to the next level and play, whether because they don't have the ability to or they don't want to. You're still treading on dangerous things like with steroids. Eh, Psychologically, it's I would say 10 times more powerful than the physical effect, and the physical effect is incredible.
Yeah.
So it's a very dangerous place to tread. I would be very cautious of doing it. I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
I did, and I did it at Michigan State. And,
Mhm.
looking back, and this was, I realized this a long time ago, it was a mistake for doing it and all the stuff that came with it. And then, of course, now as time goes on, you're going to have side effects from it. You're going to have side effects from it immediately, but you're also going to, like, and I'm not talking good side effects that aren't, good, but you're also going to have side effects you don't know that could happen later in life.
Mhm.
And it's just a matter of, it's a risk that you're taking.
Yeah.
So I would say, be, you know, being big and strong is really, it's great and all, but is it worth it? I guess you got to ask yourself, is it worth it?
Yeah. Um, so kind of transition that before the draft, you trained with Rory Liedermeyer, correct?
Mhm. Yeah.
What was it like training with him? And then you were the Incredible Bulk, arguably the most famous Sports Illustrated cover. That was around that time. What was that time like?
Well, Rory was my trainer probably for 3 years. You know, so the two of those years were my junior and senior year at Michigan State. And obviously he lived in Cali and I was in Michigan. So, it was like, what kind of workouts to do and, the whole nutrition plan, all that stuff. Rory is probably one of the most um, knowledgeable people that I know, even to this day, and I'm at 54 years old, about working out, how to work out, depending on what your goal is, of course, nutrition, rest and recovery, all these things. He's a plethora of knowledge, and there's that unseen, like it's like that non-tangible factor that comes with Rory of how he can motivate somebody by almost kind of like by reinforcement instead of getting in your face, right? And there's a time to get in your face and there's a time to yell and scream, but there's also his style is so good that it just makes you wanna, fight for him. Um, Great guy, just a great guy.
Yeah. Talk about the Incredible Bulk being on Sports Illustrated.
Well, that was on, I remember exactly where it was. It was on the break. There was these huge breaking wall rocks right on Venice Beach in California. And Sports Illustrated had, I think the photographer had spent about 4 days with me. So they were shooting a bunch of different things, but then they were like, this is like, it might be a cover. So if it ends up being a cover, this is kind of like the idea the photographer had, who's a great photographer, who ends up being like one of my like photographers that I love. Although I forgot his, like, I didn't really even care at that time who the photographer was. But later in life now, being a photographer, he's like on my bookmarks on my browser as like this photographer that I admire. And then it wasn't till the E60, which was only a year and a half ago, till I realized that was the guy that took my cover shot.
That's
So it was kind of funny. It was funny as heck. Especially when they interviewed him and because he was the catalyst for me to get into photography just by showing me the Polaroid proof, which now it doesn't, really doesn't exist because everything's digital. You just look at the back of the camera. But being on the cover was cool. Sports Illustrated carried a lot more value back then and a lot more weight. There's so many media sources now that it's, I mean, like, you can get information a lot of places. At that time, they were like the authority. So I think there was like more exposure. Internet didn't really exist. And it was kind of like a phenomenon. I think SI had told me that, and this was recently in the last 10 years, that in the 1980s, that was the third most selling cover or magazine that that they had sold. Number one, I think, was a Bo Jackson cover. I think it was the one with like the baseball bat behind his head, and I can't remember what the second one was, but then I think my cover was like the third most selling. So why, I don't know. I have no idea. It's just, I don't know. It's maybe it was just because it was just different.
Yeah,
it was different
for sure. So when you stopped doing steroids when you were going into the NFL, when you get drafted by Green Bay, you quote unquote call them the village. You didn't want to go there. Talk about like your holdout and during that time, and what was it about Green Bay?
So you gotta remember, I'm like, first of all, there's no excuse for any of that behavior that I had. I mean, it was arrogant. It was literally being a jackass. And I had an opportunity to, and did have the opportunity, and got drafted by one of the greatest franchises in the NFL with history and everything. I looked at it as, it's a small market. It's not a big city like Chicago, New York, LA, or whatever, or Dallas or Miami. I wanted to go to a big market and maximize, potential for branding, for whatever. Instead of looking at it like, hey, you're going to a place that has like a lot of history and is very prestigious. So yeah, I mean, calling him an idiot, or calling them a village, and I was like, later on I said, yeah, every village needs an idiot, right? So apparently I was the one. And the best part is, I can look back and laugh about it, and I think a lot of people can look back and laugh about it. But mistakes were made. There was no doubt mistakes were made, but some of those mistakes could not be corrected just because they just can't be. But a lot of them could be corrected. And so it's like, what am I going to do about it? So I started correcting a lot of those problems.
Yeah, for sure. Green Bay is the only place where you can park in someone's front yard. Me and my dad always do that up there. We got stuck one day after it was a rainy game. We got stuck in someone's front driveway. And they towed us out, and we left the biggest like tire mark. His front yard was destroyed.
A very close analogy to that, and if you've ever, like, I got to experience that, but if you go to Speedway, Indiana, which is in Indianapolis, but basically the middle of Indianapolis, where the Indy 500 is, people like charge like if they can fit 4 cars in their front yard, their grass, they'll charge like $100 per spot.
Yeah, my dad does insurance for the town of Speedway. He does a Chamber of Commerce, so
he probably knows.
We actually go every year. There's a place called Charlie Brown's. You ever heard of it?
Yeah, I have. Yeah,
everyone goes before the game. All the drive. It's a really cool experience.
Yeah, it is a pretty cool experience.
I have to ask about this before we get into some serious stuff. You almost fought Mike Tyson. Yes. Was that a holdout tactic, or was that really something that was planned?
Well, it's probably a good thing I didn't, because I might not be doing this interview right now. But it was all legit. I mean, it was legit. And then the side effect that we looked at it as was like this also could be used as a tactic to, kind of force Green Bay's hand to get me signed. But it wasn't something that was made up. There was a promoter, Shelley Finkel, and I'm a boxing trainer or manager, whatever they call it. I think trainer they call him, Lou Duva, who's iconic in the industry. And they called my agent up, and my agent, was my football agent. He was the one doing the negotiating for my contract. And they called him, and he was kind of skeptical about it, like, is this a fake call or whatever? And it was all legit. And they flew out to California because I was living out there for 9 months, after school, and they worked me out and did all that stuff. And it came down to the money negotiations. And I was like, I mean, I was in the best shape of my life and big and strong. But Mike Tyson, I was a huge fan and still am a huge fan of Mike Tyson. But he was a holy terror, so I was like, if I'm going to risk my life going into the ring, I'm going to get paid for it.
That was
So yeah. So during those negotiations, the Packers, and we ended up reaching an agreement, and then obviously that dissolved that whole other thing with Tyson.
Yeah. Obviously, you get signed by Packers. At this point in time, you're not doing steroids. You switch to painkillers.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your emotional presence in like Green Bay and like for kids watching who are playing sports who are doing drugs and different things like
Right.
that?
Well, I basically replaced one drug, steroids, with another, which was painkillers, and then added alcohol to it.
Mhm.
So even though one is a performance enhancing drug, which wasn't that phrase wasn't even existed back then, it was a steroid to get you bigger and stronger and faster. Um, uh, then knowing going into the NFL that the testing was going to be more sophisticated, so I wouldn't be able to get by that testing. So I was like, I'm just swearing off of steroids. And there was, it was like the worst kept secret in college football that I was taking steroids. So I almost in a week period, I just started taking more painkillers,
Mhm.
just to zone out, more or less to zone out. And really, it's really comes down to, I mean, I don't care if it's a painkiller. I don't care if it's a Xanax, like muscle relaxant. I don't care if it's, it doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
If you're trying to zone out from the chin up,
Mhm.
you like, and then start doing it every day and start doing it all day, every day, it's like, it's a red flag. And so, I was checked out. I was there, but I wasn't there. It was like I was zoned out. I was not capable of doing the things that I had done. And that's, like, that's the story. It's like, could I have played without the steroids? Well, yeah, I could have. I did. I made a comeback with Indy and played there for 3 years. I was lucky to get a chance there. So it was not, I was not on a winning streak during those years in Green Bay.
Yeah, for sure. You don't get picked up after you play 4 years in Green Bay, then you don't get picked up. You go to Traverse City. You do. I remember one of the big things that stuck out to me in the E60 interview was the when you actually did an interview with ESPN during
Yeah.
that time, and then you talk about in that interview afterward. You go to a rehab treatment clinic, and
Detroit.
who was like the main influences in you going to rehab, and then once you became sober, what made you contemplate the NFL comeback?
Well, so the guy that talked to me about getting sober he was kind of my workout. Well, he was my workout partner. So I was so I left Green Bay in January of '93. So I was there. My contract was up, and they said they were not going to re-sign me. So I became a free agent, and I didn't want to play football anymore.
Yeah.
So for the next 3 years, all I did was drink and drug in, Traverse City. It was not, I thought things couldn't get worse, and they got worse. So a good friend of mine, who was also my lifting partner at the time, basically we just had a conversation, and he was like, I think you might want to take a serious look at what you're doing to yourself. And when he was talking, he talked about being out of football for 3 years now, and that kind of like hit me. Like, I was like, what do you mean I've been out of football for 3 years? It felt like it was 6 months.
Yeah.
So he's like, no, you've been out 3 years. And I think I actually pulled the calendar off the wall to look at the calendar to make sure. And so I'd been out of football for 3 years, and he basically it said what I just said. If you don't, it said, if you don't change what you're doing, you're going to die. And there were many people that had said that to me, hundreds of people that had said that to me in Green Bay, trying to help me. Everything from people in the front office to the coaching staff to training staff to other players that cared. But I just wasn't ready to hear it.
Yeah.
And, I was still kind of had that feeling of, I got this, I'm good. And then, but when he said it, I was ready to hear it. And I think a part of it was, I really trusted him and had a good relationship with him. He was my workout partner. And I never tried going into treatment. I tried stopping probably over hundreds of different ways, but never could stop. And he suggested treatment, and I was to the point where I agreed. And I said, you know what, I'll do anything. I'll do anything to change this, because I'm so sick and tired of my BS.
Yeah. So when you go to the rehab center, you start contemplating a comeback to the NFL. What was the big spark really in that?
Well, so I'm in treatment 17 days at Brighton Hospital, which I think is now called Ascension Brighton Hospital, and they still are. That's all they do is
Yeah.
drug and alcohol and maybe some other kind of stuff, but treatment wise. But when I was in there 17 days, and when I left, I had no intention of going back to play. I was just kind of wanted to get sober and be, alcohol and drug free, and just living, just low key normal life. And as I got more sober, meaning as months went by, my head started to clear up, and it took about a good 2 years for my head to totally clear up. But as in the initial stages, it cleared up fast. Like, it would clear up fast.
Yeah.
I started to realize the wreckage that I created with the Packers, and and all the hype of this SI, and the hype and the things that I had said, and the arrogance and cockiness and all that. And I thought, I realized it, and I was like, well, I'm still not sure I would want to go back and play. Plus, it's like, well, what do you do about it? You can't make those things right. Well, like I said earlier, some of them you can't, but a lot of them you can. And I started working out again, and I left treatment. I was like 255 pounds, and I looked skinny. And in 6 months, just from working out and, not doing any drugs, sleeping, getting enough sleep, eating right, doing the right things, I was like 295, 300 pounds, and I was a, muscular 295. And that was with no steroids. I mean, it was like with creatine, right? And creatine back then was horrible compared to what it is now. And again, just living correctly, or living, healthy. And so then I thought, you know what? If I made one of the ways I could try to make things right was to try to come back and just keep my mouth shut and just do things the right way, and just kind of lead by example, lead by my actions. So the other thing was, I don't know if I'm going to get a chance, because I burned all my bridges.
Yeah.
So that was a factor. But I was like, well, you know what? If I get a chance, that's all I need. And luckily, Indy gave me a chance, and was lucky enough to, play there for 3 years.
Yeah. It was really funny when I was looking. Your Packers coach was the guy that brought you with the Colts.
Yeah. He was the offensive coordinator for Indianapolis. And then it was a month period where Coach Marcher Broda, who was the head coach of Indy, was retiring. And then they promoted the offensive coordinator, Lindy Infante, to head coach. And yeah, he was the head coach for me at Green Bay.
Yeah. So you had 3 pretty successful years with the Colts. You retired. Why did you make that decision to retire at 32?
My shoulder, this shoulder had pretty much worn out. We thought it was, could be something torn, or a rotator cuff and stuff that they go in and fix. And they went in there to kind of to scope it, to clean it up. And when they went in, it was kind of like there was like a lot of the bone was gone just from like literally wear and tear on the bone. And they were like, there's nothing to do in there.
Yeah.
And like I couldn't, at that point, I couldn't reach up into like a cupboard to get a glass out of the cupboard because my shoulder hurt so bad.
Mhm.
So they they were all aware, the doctors and trainers at Indy were all aware of my recovery, and because I'd made them all aware of it before I even signed with them.
Yeah.
So they were like, you could potentially play one more year, but it would have to, you'd probably have to take some painkillers, and we could control that, like where you don't have to handle them, and we would hold on to them and only give them to you when necessary. And for me, I was like, I felt like I had done kind of slayed the demons I needed to slay by coming back and playing, without drugs, trying to make as many things right as possible. And I was like, I don't even want to dabble with the painkillers. So I was like, and I was coming up on $1 million year where it was going to be a 7-figure salary. And I was like, it's not worth it. It's just
Yeah.
not worth it. The misery and the pain and all that stuff is not worth any amount of money. So I chose to retire, and I did, and we left on great terms and still are on good terms. And they're great. I mean, I was so lucky to get a chance.
Yeah. Final like 2 questions. You're I've seen your photography. You became a photographer. You had the UFC. I think it was Ben. Who was
Uh,
it? You had the one.
Stipe Miocic.
Yeah, I thought it was. Yeah, you did that. How did your love for photography like start? I mean, you kind of talked about it, but like, what do you do with that now?
Well, it's my full-time gig now, and it has been for like the last 10 to 12, well, no, 12 to 14 years. COVID hasn't helped, obviously, just because of people contact.
Yeah.
But there's other things you can do. You can get creative and do other things, and so there's a lot of creative projects that I've written down that I'm gonna do as soon as things start loosening up. And things are loosening up a little bit, but still it's not nearly normal.
Yeah.
And then you do what you got to do to survive, as far as living day to day and help, whether it's helping myself or helping other people, or whatever the case may be. One of the back burner projects I had that was a serious thing I wanted to do, but it was always on the back burner because I was so busy with my photography stuff, was to start a podcast. So I started my own podcast, and in like November. So, I've got like just almost 10 episodes now, and I just didn't want to throw anybody on there. So it's like, it's about people that interest me, that are like outliers, that are like just normal people, but they do just extraordinary things. And it could be anything. There's no like demographic that doesn't qualify. Everybody qualifies.
Yeah.
So that's, and the podcast is called One Man's Ethos, and it's on Spotify and all the places. So I started that project, and I'm making my book that I released in 2009. I'm putting it on audio.
Okay.
So because that option is not available right now on Amazon for my book. So I figured, well, I'll make my book audio. And then that was released in 2009. So I'm going to add a few chapters to it to kind of bring everybody up to speed on what's happened the last 11 years.
Yeah.
Because there's been some interesting things happen the last 11 years, I think, that are worth talking about.
Yeah. Podcasts are really fun. We started this about a month ago, I think. I've had 53 athletes came on. We had, New York Jets player Pat Elflein came on, but
Awesome.
it's really just talking to, athletes, and everyone has like a cool story you can get from it.
Yeah.
Real conversations.
Yeah. It's awesome. I think what you're doing is awesome. I think it's, I always, I got your message about would I be a guest on the podcast. So anybody that sends me a message, I'll always do my due diligence and look at what their podcast is about, or, if it's something that doesn't fit with my genre or what I'm doing, then I just will, gracefully decline. And I saw that your podcast has only started a month ago, but I watched a brief part of each of the episodes, and I was like, no, this is legit. This is good. And I think it's, and I'm like, kudos to this, kudos to Luke. I mean, I think this is a great thing because, you could be, I mean, and this is not to be funny, but there's no reason why you couldn't be the next Joe Rogan,
Yeah, thank you.
and unless you believe that, I mean, if you believe that you can't, you won't,
Yeah,
definitely. But if you believe that you could, and if you keep thinking that and improving stuff and everything, you can become anything you want. And it's just a matter of believing in yourself.
thank you. We actually, for this video, we're gonna have City of Dublin's gonna shout out. My friend, one of my best friends, he has cancer, Drew Strong. So we're gonna promote this video to help him out. Um,
Awesome.
so I
That's
really
awesome.
appreciate this. I want to finish with one quick question.
Yeah.
What do you want people to remember about Tony Mandarich when you're like after your career's over?
You mean when I die?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
um, you know, it, I always, I may not have been, and even to this day am not a very agreeable person. Um, but I am very agreeable,
mm,
if that makes any sense. It's like I will challenge things that I don't think are right.
mhm,
Um, and I will accept challenge from people that if I'm doing something or saying something, and if I can't back it up, by fact, I mean, you got to show me proof of what you're preaching, or what you're sharing. I don't even like the word preaching, but what you're sharing with other people to be true, because there's so much nonsense on the internet right now.
mhm,
And not just the internet, there's nonsense on networks now.
mhm.
It's become a joke.
Yeah,
So I want authentic, I want somebody who was, if it was to be remembered, as somebody that always wasn't afraid to say what he believed in and what he thought, and someone that wouldn't, I don't want to say I was fearless in everything, because of course, yeah, I have fear with stuff and I'm scared of certain things, but um, to be honest and transparent, and find out what you believe in, dig your heels in on those things, and live that way on a day-to-day basis, because the most important thing is what you're doing right now, today. It's like, like football was awesome, it was great, and I acknowledge it and I accept the failures and the successes,
mhm,
but that's something I did, and it's okay to talk about, but I don't sit there and dwell on it. It's like, what am I doing today, to, you know, add good things to the people or the world or whatever, instead of taking. And, it's kind of this last year, and I'm not talking about, well, actually, is a result of COVID. COVID has revealed a lot of people
mhm,
of what they're really like.
mhm.
And so in that aspect, it's been great. I'm sure psychologists and psychiatrists have had a field day watching people,
Yeah,
the whole toilet paper phenomenon, right? It's
uh-huh,
like, it's just funny. So, but yeah, just to be somebody that always said what he wanted to say and always believed that anything was possible.
yeah,
And I really do believe anybody can do anything if they're willing to put in the work.
yeah. That I can't preach that enough. I think when I first started this, everyone told me it was the stupidest idea and I
Right.
couldn't do anything
Right.
with it. And I was like, I'm like, I can do something if I just like bring it. And
Exactly.
just try. You can do anything. Um,
What's the worst thing that can happen?
I
It
told
doesn't work, right?
I told
Or you would,
this
yeah,
happened. I could never have got a single person on my show, and I could have tried something.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then, you may have started it and then found out after a year that, what, you really don't like it as much as you thought you would, or it just might just take off.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
Tony, you really impacted my life through. I really thank you for coming on. This was
I,
awesome.
I appreciate you for having me on, and I appreciate you for asking. And Drew and his family will be in my prayers and my thoughts. So hopefully, the best works out, and just keep doing what you're doing, man, because you dictate your future, and really there is no limit.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
One sec. I'm gonna